Hello, everyone. My name is Joe Zalewski, and I'd like to welcome you to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Manhattan. We are an inclusive congregation here, and we strive to be known as a safe haven for anyone and everyone. So that means no matter who you are, no matter how you ended up here, no matter what you believe in, as long as you're a human being, you're welcome here. And dogs are okay too, as long as your owner is Diane. All right, now we're going to light the chalice. Do you mind lighting the chalice? With words from Reverend Scott Taylor. We light this chalice for those who convinced us that it was safe to share our longings, for those who proved that not everyone will run from the weight of the pain we carry, for those who held us in our fear and helped us heal from our regret, for those whose humble apologies made us believe that we too could be forgiven, and for those whose tenderness helped us see that we no longer need to hide.
Need to find the matches.
Oh. The chalice is lit.
I have a few welcoming words as well. Is this mic on? So my name is Pastor Isabel Call, and it's my joy to serve as the minister here at UUFM and welcome Joe as a new convener. So our theme this month is vulnerability, and today we're considering the vulnerability of doing things wrong. In my reflection, I'll share how I deal with being a mistake-ridden, imperfect human being. Joe is going to be talking about the painful journey of changing one's mind, and Dick will offer an extended land acknowledgement, naming his own family's connection to colonization. Here on the land of the Kanza, Osage, and Pawnee, we recognize how the vulnerability of our indigenous cousins was exploited. We endeavor to join them in solidarity by opening our minds and hearts to the links between their struggles and the privileges enjoyed by others. So we have a special gift this morning from the choir, and it is time. So there is sweet music here.
When Aiden was born, oh dear, everyone thought he was a girl. His parents gave him a pretty name. His room looked like a girl's room, and he wore clothes that other girls liked wearing. As Aiden got bigger, everyone thought he was just a different kind of girl. But Aiden didn't feel like a different kind of girl. Aiden was really another kind of boy. It was hard to tell his parents what he knew about himself, but it was even harder not to. It took everyone some time to adjust, and they learned a lot from other families with transgender kids like him. Aiden explored different ways of being a boy. He tried out lots of names until one stuck. They changed his bedroom into a place where he belonged. He also took much better care of his new clothes. Then one day, Mom and Dad had something to tell him. "I'm going to have a baby," Mom announced. "A baby?" Aiden said. "Does that mean I get to be the big brother?" "Of course," said Dad, ruffling his hair. Aiden thought that being a big brother was an important job for a boy like him. He wanted to make sure this baby would feel understood right away. The baby needed clothes, so Aiden and his mom went shopping. So many choices. Would the baby like seahorses or penguins better? The baby's room needed to be painted, and of course, every baby needs a name. Aiden loved getting to choose his own, but he remembered that it had been hard for his parents to let go of the name they gave him. He looked for names that could fit this new person, no matter who they grew up to be. Babies need someone to read to them. So Aiden practiced and practiced and practiced. Dad wanted to teach Aiden how to change diapers. Maybe later," said Aiden. He decided that picking flowers for Mom was more important. Yeah, it looks more important to me, too. 2 weeks before the baby's due date, Aiden started to worry. Maybe he should have picked different clothes or different paint for the bedroom. He wished he could ask the baby which name they liked best. Mom came to tuck him in. "Are you feeling okay, sweetie?" she asked. Aiden whispered, "Do you think the baby will be happy with everything? I don't want them to feel like I did when I was little. But what if I get everything wrong? What if I don't know how to be a good big brother?" Mom hugged him tight. "When you were born, we didn't know you were going to be our son. We made some mistakes, but you helped us fix them. And you taught us how important it is to love someone for exactly who they are. This baby is so lucky to have you, and so are we." The next day, Aiden found boxes of his old baby pictures. He looked so different back then. It hadn't been easy, but he liked the boy he was growing into. Maybe everything wouldn't be perfect for this baby. Maybe he would have to fix mistakes he didn't even know he was making. And maybe that was okay. Aiden knew how to love someone, and that was the most important part of being a brother. The end. Wow. All right. You guys coming to class?
Now we have an important budget update from our treasurer, Dan Swenson.
Yeah, is there a slide here? So, yeah, I'm your treasurer. I'm Dan Swenson, and before I start going into details, I want to acknowledge Sandy Nelson, who is the bookkeeper. She really does all the work, and I just make the reports. And I also want to acknowledge Jim Mitchell. He is the primary donor of the endowment that we do have, and without him, we just would not have the flexibility that is open to us now. So we need to really be thankful for the donation he made. So for people who likes graphs, this is a graph that shows where we are. We always start out, this shows income in blue, and the yellow is the expenses. So we always start out with initial, some people give their donations at the beginning of the year. So we always have more income at the beginning of the year. Then as the year goes along, gradually expenses are a little bit larger than our income, and so gradually those lines come together. And where we are right now is that our income is still a little bit larger than our expenses. So at the end of February, we have income of $148,000, and our expenses have been $133,000. But if we project to the end of the year using what happened last year, the estimate I make is that we're going to have about $181,000 in income and about $190,000 in expenses. So we're about $10,000 short of our expenses will be larger than our income by about $10,000, which isn't great, but it's a whole lot better than we planned for. We planned for having to have a shortfall of about $35,000. So we really have done pretty good this year. Now, there's a couple things that we need to finish here. The Grow Green is coming up, and I'll send out an email about that. But if we can have the same kind of positive response during Grow Green that we had last year, that's going to help us a lot. And that's about it. I'll be in the back for other questions if you have to answer, try to answer questions if you have them. And so my bottom line is let's be encouraged by what we've done, and let's be committed to the future. And I think we'll turn out okay. So thank you.
And now we have a special land acknowledgement from Vic Beeman.
Today's land acknowledgement is not a recognition of the original people of Kansas. Instead, it's a personal story from Beeman family history. There must be countless similar stories about early interactions between whites and Native Americans in the family ancestral memories of many of us, but memories fade. The fact that mine survived is a testament to the deeply ingrained British precedent for keeping and preserving written records of official proceedings and transactions in colonial New England. Keweenaw and Niarum are the names of two native Nipmuc Agawam women who lived in what is now Springfield, Massachusetts in 1635. My ancestor, Simon Beeman, purchased a small plot of that land in 1639. It's likely that Keweenaw and Niarum were still living when Simon gained title to a parcel of their ancestral land. Simon had come to America in 1636 as part of the great wave of Puritan immigration to New England. By the time of the founding of Springfield in that same year, 1636, the Nipmuc Nation, whose ancestors had called Massachusetts home for millennia, had already been decimated by smallpox. By then, only a few hundred local Agawam natives survived out of the original many thousands. The Puritan colonist William Pynchon was the founder of Springfield. Pynchon was unique among Puritan leaders in fully acknowledging the humanity of native peoples and insisting on fairness in the wording and enforcement of contracts and treaties between natives and whites, requiring that the rights of natives and the obligations of the whites be clearly specified in writing. Pynchon studied the language and culture of the local Agawam Indians and was regarded as the most fluent European speaker of the Agawam Nipmuc dialect of the Algonquian language family. In his contracts and treaties, he included Agawam words in an effort to facilitate mutual understanding of the terms of the contracts. Pynchon even named important individual native women participants in the contracts, being sensitive to the matriarchal traditions of the Agawam. The previously named Keweenaw, the mother of the chief Sachem, and Niarum, the wife of a lesser chief, were two of those named in the contract negotiated and signed by Pynchon on July 15, 1636, ceding to the colonists what was thereafter known as Springfield. But Pynchon's best intentions could not alter the fact that the European concept of land ownership and inheritance in perpetuity was alien to the native mindset. The surviving Agawam band was already a tattered remnant, and any land sales made in good faith were all eventually eclipsed and swamped by the great land thefts that became the universal saga of native cultural annihilation. Those few whites with good intentions were still unwittingly helping to pave the road to disenfranchisement and genocide of native peoples. William Pynchon was not only the founder of Springfield, but he was also a wealthy businessman. My ancestor, Simon Beeman, was a shoemaker who was dependent on Pynchon for supplies and who sometimes paid for those supplies with work rather than coin. Simon is frequently mentioned in William Pynchon's diaries and business logs, and those of his son and successor, John Pynchon, throughout the entire 36 years of Simon's residence in Springfield. Simon paddled a canoe up the Connecticut River to collect beaver pelts for Pynchon in trade from Agawam trappers. At various times, Pynchon's work ledgers credit Simon for carting hay, serving as cattle drover, plowing, field work, mending shoes, and blooding horses. By 1675, the Agawam, who had struggled to accommodate and to coexist with the European invaders, were faced with imminent ruin, as were indigenous tribes throughout New England, as a result of incessant violations of native rights specified in treaties. The European encroachment, already having proceeded for over 50 years, had squeezed the native peoples of Massachusetts and all the tribes of New England to the point of desperation. In 1675, in one of the last conflicts of King Philip's War, the Agawam natives raided the little town of Springfield and set it ablaze. Simon Beeman was killed in the attack, and his cabin, like most of the wooden buildings in Springfield, was destroyed in the conflagration. Simon's widow, my ancestor Alice Beeman, somehow lost title to the land, perhaps to pay Simon's debts. But the town fathers eventually granted her compensation, possibly motivated by Simon's long association with the Springfield luminaries William and John Pynchon. The minutes of the town meeting of February 3rd, 1679 include the following, quote, The town, being desirous to accommodate the widow Beeman with some land to set an house upon, hereby resolves to see where they may with most conveniency to her and least inconveniency to the highways and passages, lay to her about a quarter of acre to set a building upon, unquote. No doubt Alice Beeman, like almost all European pioneer women, was a mere pawn in the unfolding indigenous apocalypse. No doubt she lived a life of poverty, drudgery, and limited opportunity. But while she was adapting to her grant of a small plot, the children and families of Kawanusk and Niaram, two of the Agawam women whose ancestral home contained Alice Beeman's quarter acre, were experiencing the final death blow to their freedom, culture, society, autonomy, and tribal identity. The broken vestiges of the Pakumtuk Agawam Nipmuc nations were dispersed, enslaved by the victors of King Philip's War, driven westward, or Christianized and assimilated into Euro-American society. The only indigenous peoples memorial in present-day Springfield is a bronze statue of the Native American defector who alerted the town of Springfield that the Agawam attack was imminent. His warning came too late to prevent a tragedy, but in view of human nature and of the cumulative history of the preceding century, tragedy seemed inevitable.
Thank you, Dick. Here at UUFM, the offering we receive on Sunday morning goes to a special organization each month. Our March Helping Hands recipient is the Wonder Workshop Children's Museum, which offers interactive play and learning spaces for children and their families indoors and out. You can donate online by going to uufm.net and clicking the donate link and choosing the particular fund. If you're here in person, you can put your offering in the basket in the back. I'd also like to invite you to use this time to share your joys and sorrows. You can write on the paper near you or in the back of the room, and Jill can come around and pick up your papers. I will read them if you're here in the sanctuary, and then if you're here on Zoom, you can write your joy or sorrow in the chat for Kathy Hedge to read. Such beautiful music today. Thank you, Renee. Spirit of love and compassion, open our ears, open our hearts, and as necessary, open our hands to action as we take in the joys, sorrows, celebrations, and concerns of this community. We have a number of joys here in the sanctuary today. I know I'm joining Renee. Renee is so grateful to be performing again with the choir. Special thanks to Michael Oldfather, founder of the choir, for getting the ball rolling, and Kathleen Oldfather for babysitting Juniper during rehearsals. And thank you, choir, for being here and bringing us your voices. Kathy and Dan Swenson share, we are looking forward to a visit from our daughter Laura and two grandsons, and our son Aaron today and tomorrow. Fabulous. And Sylvia shares these words. Step into the woods to see the splendor of mosses and lichens, reborn in hues of bright yellow greens and pale blues. This is their time to fruit and multiply. Kathy, share with us what's come in Zoom.
Yes, Susan says, I was pleased to join Pastor Isa, Sylvia Beeman, and Kathy Swenson at the State House this week to lobby to lobby for individuals' bodily autonomy. We heard powerful testimony against the so-called women's rights law.
Mm-hmm.
That is a joy she'd like to share.
Oh, thank you.
And that's it.
All right. So moving into sorrows, I would like to bring forward again the sorrow that we heard last week about the passing of Stephen Turner. Given the long relationship we have with his wife Susan and the many months we have been holding them in our thoughts, let's take more space to grieve and acknowledge this loss. He passed away about 2 a.m. Thursday morning, March 2nd. Susan shared, "Thank you from the bottom of my heart to everyone for your love and support as we come to this conclusion." And I also wanted to lift up, several of us attended the panel for International Women's Day hosted by the American Association of University Women. While it was a joy to hear such strength and resilience, it was also quite painful to hear about their many hardships. It was incredibly moving at the end when a young woman from Iran asked for the mic to give voice to her anguish about what is happening to women and girls in Iran, their isolation, and the poison attacks on schoolgirls. So I lift up that soul pain and trauma and invite you to send your love to women and girls in harm's way. And let us rededicate ourselves to the ways we are already a part of creating justice and safety in our world. Please join me for a moment of silence as we honor all that has been shared and all that remains quietly in our hearts. So I have been getting in touch with my imperfection lately. This past Monday, I decided to make this short reflection about the vulnerability of making mistakes. I was about to meet with Joe and Dick about this service, and I was excited to tell them my topic. I was at home, I opened the Zoom room, and I realized I hadn't sent the Zoom link to Dick, so I gave him a call. "Hey, how are you?" "I'm fine," he said. "I'm just walking into the kitchen." "The kitchen at the fellowship?" I said. "Yep." And now Joe, who had just logged into Zoom, thought I was talking to him, and he said, "No, I'm in my own kitchen." Ay, ay, ay. They were both really graceful about navigating my mistake. And part of that, I mean, they're just graceful, but part of it was my part, which was I was honestly very sorry, and I wanted to make amends. As a humanist, someone who finds God or the divine through relationship, admitting my mistakes and making them right is a spiritual practice for me. I've learned a lot how to do it through 12-step programs. Making amends is one of the steps, but it comes after a lot of other work. It's not step 1 or step 2, it's step 9. So I'm going to summarize the steps in my own language. Translated, they're quite UU friendly. And they're actually the roadmap we've been taking with our land acknowledgement process, our beyond land acknowledgement. And Dick modeled some of that today. As a congregation, as a country, we have not gotten to step 9, but we're working on it. Some of us are working on it. So step 1, we accept we're not in control of everything. Step 2, we get in touch with a greater benevolence that can help us make meaning from our mistakes and those of our ancestors. Step 3, we make a commitment to working with that benevolent force rather than trying to do everything ourselves. 4, take a good look at all the mistakes we've made in our life, in our community. 5, share them with an appropriate person or people. 6, identify patterns. 7, ask for help in changing those patterns. And 8, set an intention to make amends. And then wait until we're sure we're truly willing to do it. Then we can forgive ourselves for being imperfect, do what we can to right what was wrong, and move on. So now I turn it to Joe.
Thank you. Yeah, unfortunately, I also have a reflection. So, about 1 year ago, a year and a half ago, I was beginning the process of wiggling my way out of the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church has a problem with people doing that these days. There's a lot of books on the market about why you shouldn't leave the Catholic Church. So I was entertaining myself by reading some of these books. And for the most part, it was entertaining, but not always. There were some moments that got me. Did you know we've all been greatly misled by Protestant propaganda? It turns out the Inquisition wasn't as bad as you've been told. I also read a lot about miracles, definitely real. I learned about a woman who predicted 9/11 before it happened. and a woman who went 20 years without eating any food, and signs in the sky that thousands of people saw at once, and all kinds of amazing things. And of course, I learned that the origins of the church have been greatly misrepresented by those atheist scholars. And I imagine many of you find it easy to smile at these things, but just imagine for a moment what would happen to you if you didn't. You might have the thought that I had, oh God, have they been right all along? So that happened to me many times, and it was sometimes with things that sound just as silly as those things. And I haven't lived a very long life, I'm only 25, but I've spent an inordinate amount of that life thinking about hell. On a certain level, I might be a hell expert. So you can imagine that these thoughts brought up some bad stuff for me. And it got to such a point that these books had like a repulsive magnetic aura around them. I couldn't even pick them up if I wasn't in the right frame of mind for it. So I want to say this problem is not unique to hell-bound infidels like me. I have a friend that anyone will tell you is a real Jesus person, and I was talking to him once and I told him I was reading the book, The God Delusion. And he said he was not reading The God Delusion, but not because he wasn't interested. He said, to be perfectly honest, I've been wanting to get around to that, but I'm a little bit afraid to read it. So what do you think he was afraid of? Like, surely this guy didn't think that Richard Dawkins had any shocking truths to reveal to him, right? If he couldn't be certain, who could? How could a guy like that be of two minds? It sort of shakes our intuition about certainty, or even about identity, maybe. Now, as for me, I had already learned an effective coping strategy for dangerous books. That was to ridicule them. And I may have done it a little bit a few minutes ago. But I learned from the very best. You see, when I was 19 years old and about to drop out of college, I was fond of watching endless streams of right-wing pundits on YouTube. And I was particularly fond of a genre called the response video. Here's how you make a response video. You take someone else's video. The best practice was to pick on a feminist, and you chop it up into segments and insert your own hot takes and edit it all together so it looks like a recorded debate. But of course, she can't see you or hear you, so it's very easy to win the debate. And so this was basically the strategy that I adopted when I was reading these books. I said, I'm going to make it into a game. How many tidbits can I find in here that somehow impugn the author's credibility? Is he just a bad writer? Does he quote some kind of historical fact that's not quite right? Does he admit to using drugs as a kid? Anything. So I didn't have to get very far into these books before I could conclude, this guy doesn't have anything to teach me. And then instead of being worried for the rest of the book, I could just be comfortably angry. And I felt much safer this way. But on the other hand, if there was any truth or wisdom in those books, I'm sure I missed it. So should we say that my strategy worked or not? So the reason I still think about the response video channels all these years later, they still fascinate me because they did the same thing I did, but on a grand scale. It was basically their job to watch and analyze all this feminist content. And it was safe to say that if anyone knew the facts of what feminists say, they did inside and out. And yet, to the last man, they were all convinced that feminism was completely stupid. No rational person could ever be a feminist. Now, I think you and I know that there are rational people who are feminists, and they must have their rationale. But in spite of hundreds of hours of exposure, these guys had somehow avoided engaging with that. And whatever deep, exciting debate there was to be had with the feminists, they hadn't even begun to have it. Now, I'm not just going to pick on them. I'm suggesting that I was doing the same thing. I was giving the outward appearance that I was collecting knowledge by reading these books, but something was getting in the way of understanding. After a while, I realized I was spending a lot of my time on this business of being right. I was spending many anxious hours ruminating on why I didn't need to worry about the Catholics anymore. And I was forced to come face to face with a different hard question. Is this what my soul wants? Is this how I should be spending my time? So last year on my birthday, I joined this fellowship because I was searching for a place where religion would be a more constructive experience and not a fight. And that evening, there was the most beautiful sunset as I was driving back into town, and then there was an awesome lightning storm, and I was so satisfied with everything. I believe I might have said the jinxed words, "What could go wrong now?" Well, it didn't take me very long to come to the horrifying realization that a lot of what we do here revolves around Democratic Party politics, which is a subject that I had less than zero interest in. And it took many people to convince me that I was actually a legitimate part of this group, but they did. I now mostly believe that our principles of inclusion and freedom of thought are not empty words. We actually live up to that. However, I am suspicious of the way that some of us talk about Republicans, because you see, I was raised by Republicans, and if there's one thing I can tell you for sure, it's that I am not a kinder or more loving person than they are. And yet I don't think any of you would talk about me that way. It's confusing. So over the last year, I've heard many conversations about Republican policies. And I've heard lots of insightful analysis about the wording of bills and amendments and things like that. What I haven't heard a lot of is any insightful thoughts about the reasons why these bills and amendments come about. Do we know on a deep level what the average Republican voter wants? I don't think we do. I think our analysis usually stops early with a comforting cliche like hate or misinformation, sort of like the God of the gaps fallacy. Now, I'm not going to be the first person to propose a theory for why our country is so divided, but I think it has to do with our lack of vulnerability. I think the perception that we're divided has become in itself a cause of division, and now it is so hard for many of us to put ourselves in our enemy's shoes. Once we've identified them as the enemy, it's very hard to stand in our enemy's shoes and imagine thinking what they think as if they were also a rational human being. We can tell ourselves, well, surely open-mindedness is a great thing, but it doesn't extend to evil or stupidity. It's the usual excuse, right? I've used that on myself too. But the problem is, I notice that any idea I'm not comfortable engaging with, I'm apt to label as evil or stupid. So when I was a kid, my mom often told me to be more open-minded. She was usually talking about something like ketchup or mustard or gummy worms or veggie burgers, always something bad. There is, after all, no need to be open-minded about good things. My mental image for open-mindedness was someone's head split open down the middle and grimy black flies coming in from the environment and landing on the brain goop. And I thought, that's not for me. I think I'll keep my mind safely closed, thank you. But As I got older, I realized there are equally putrid metaphors for that kind of thinking. And so I don't have any answers to give you at the end here. All I can say is that I've come to the conclusion that it's hard to have a mind either way. All right. Are we ready for a closing song? Let's join in singing hymn number 131, Love Will Guide Us.
Well, I have some closing words. They're not too long. You can stay standing or you can sit, up to you. So these are the words of Reverend Kendall Gibbons, who's my colleague in Kansas City. There is finally only one thing required of us. That is to take life whole, the sunlight and the shadows together, to live the life that is given us with courage and humor and truth. We have such a little moment out of the vastness of time for all our wondering and loving. Therefore, let there be no half-heartedness. Rather, let the soul be ardent in its pain, in its yearning, in its praise. Then shall peace enfold our days, and glory shall not fade from our lives. Voila. Thank you, Joe. So I have a couple of announcements as we go on our way. Our kitchen door code will be changed this week. So if you have a need to know it, reach out to Mark Mayfield and he'll give you the code, the new code. And if you need help finding him, you could ask me. We have more discussion groups this week pertaining to the call process for Pastor Isa. If you haven't had a chance to do one of these discussion groups, you can see the announcement slides for the time, they'll come up here again. And then finally, please stay for the Sunday Services workshop. We were going to get started at 12:15, but we can probably get started earlier than that, maybe 11:50. We'll get started. There are snacks. There's hummus and carrots and other things. So grab some snacks, come back. We're going to think about what kind of services we want to have in the future. You don't have to sign up to be a convener to come to this workshop. We just want collective ownership, and we want to know what we want. So that's what the workshop is for. So go snack. See you soon.